I'm honored to be up here. My name's Rich Palladino. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me for tonight's festivities. Thank you. I was inducted into this elite group in 2008 during intermission at one of Joe's Heatwave Wrestling Federation shows. And now here we are in a ballroom at the Crown Plaza in Warwick, Rhode Island to honor those in the class of 2023. I have co-hosted this event. I went from sitting in the crowd to co-hosting with the late Howard Finkel. Howard was my idol, and when Howard passed away, Joe said, hey, this year you're gonna co-host with Mean Gene, and then Mean Gene passed away. So I want to thank Joe Bruin for entrusting me to run this show, and I hope you guys are okay with that. We're going to have a good time tonight. We're going to show our respect and gratitude, thank you, to those that paved the way for New England professional wrestling. So let's get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get into our first inductee in the class of 2023, but here I want to bring up the inductor. And this guy's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time. He is a member of the 2014 New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, the yoga master himself, Knuckles Nelson.
It's great to be here amongst wrestling family and friends. There's people in this room I've known for like 30 years. I'm here to induct D.C. Drake into the Hall of Fame. First, I'd just like to say that my girlfriend Michelle is here. She's never been to a wrestling event in her life. And she told me she feels she's like at the Headbangers Ball. Right, Zombie? But Michelle, I'm a better person for having you in my life, and I love you. So I grew up here in Rhode Island, about 10 miles up the road in Scituate. And Scituate, Rhode Island was the last place to get cable TV. So the way I stayed up on the happenings of wrestling back in the day was wrestling magazines. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? I would go to the local drugstores and the pharmacies, and I would buy every single magazine on the shelf, and I would read them from cover to cover, and I would cherish them, and I would never throw them away. And back then, the names that were in the magazines were Hulk Hogan, Bob Backlund, Nick Bockwinkel, Harley Race, Ric Flair, and D.C. Drake. D.C. Drake dominated in the magazines. He was always on the cover, although he was never in the WWF or the NWA. D.C. Drake wrestled for the National Wrestling Federation. And if you are not familiar with this guy, I encourage you to look up some of his matches on YouTube. You'll see him defending the NWF title against the likes of superstar Billy Graham, Jules Strongbow, Larry Winters, Sergeant Slaughter, and Bruiser Brody. D.C. Drake was in cage matches with Bruiser Brody. Could you imagine dropping Brody into a ring today in his prime? I'm going to say a few things about Drake that he probably wouldn't say about himself. He was in the 500 club, which meant he had a 500 bench press. He also was a drug and alcohol counselor and helped countless people over the years. DC is a selfless man. He really, I would use the word noble to describe him. So I would just like to take this opportunity for thank him for being my friend and ask me to come up here tonight And I would ask you all to get off your asses and raise your glasses for Mad Dog DC Drake. Nicest Mad Dog I ever met.
That's it. I'll knock it over, and that'll be the end of things, right? Well, honestly, it's really an honor to be here tonight. This actually started back in 2009 when I was originally scheduled to be inducted into the hall, and I ended up with some heart issues, and somehow we ended up disconnecting, and finally, through a chance meeting with Knuckles this past winter, I reconnected with Joe again and finally had a chance to be here and with some wonderful people that are being inducted tonight. It's truly my honor, let me tell you. So Knuckles, thank you so much for inducting me. I just wish I had a chance to see you in your time or be part of it in that time. I also want to point one other person out here tonight that came up here from Philadelphia. There was a organization that ran back in the late 80s called the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, which many people say was the precursor to ECW. And that person who started it all is here tonight. His name is Joel Goodhart, and Joel is sitting back there. So, just very briefly, I started out working in New Jersey for the American Wrestling Federation, which was an organization ran by Tito Torres, and that's who also trained me. At that point, I wasn't really all that keen on things, and I wanted to actually walk away from the business, but then I got a hold of Mario and Angelo Savoldi, and they talked me into coming up to New England, and this is really where I cut my teeth as a wrestler, here in New England. I worked for the Savoldis, I worked for Tony Rumble, and I even worked myself up here because at one point I left that and became the booker for the National Wrestling Federation, along with the people who opened it up. And we were quite proud of what we accomplished with the National Wrestling Federation. We had television in 20 states. We were working on a big TV deal. We had some of the top names in the business working for us. And then things fell apart, like they do in wrestling and the politics of wrestling. And at that point, I said, I'm done. I actually had a the business. As Knuckles said, I was a drug and alcohol clinician for almost 30 years, working with people with HIV/AIDS, and it was work I loved. As much as loving wrestling, too, I love wrestling as well. And when I walked away from the National Wrestling Federation, I was ready to call it quits, and that's when Tri-State Wrestling Alliance came into play. And I ended up working for Joel. And again, Joel in Philadelphia had some of the greatest matches in the tri-state area that you ever wanted to see. And if you want to see some great shows, go to YouTube, and you'll see some of the monster shows, some of the greatest wrestlers from all over the world. And so I got to work with them. I was their champion for about a year. And then again, I called it quits after a neck injury. So I really walked away from wrestling. I think it was 1994, maybe. And that was the end for me, and I stayed away from it. And then I just got drilled back into it, with the independent organizations. I love independent wrestling, and I'm sure you guys here love it as much as I do. There's just something special about it. And the major organizations are what they are, and they're great to watch. But the independents, that's where some of the best wrestling is, in my opinion. And I enjoy it today. And there's some garbage. There's some real garbage out there, but there are some real great organizations. And many of those organizations are centered right here in New England. So this is a hotbed of wrestling. And to sum it up, I'm just very honored to be a part of New England Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. And I want to thank everybody for being here and also congratulate everyone else who's being inducted tonight. Thank you very much.
What a great speech. I used to watch Mad Dog DC Drake on Sports Channel America.